Hello, my name's Clement Ye, and today I'm giving a tweaked art history lecture called Is This Painting Worth $1.8 million? Okay, so let's start off with this painting. This is The Voice of Fire by Barnett Newman, acrylic on canvas, painted in 1967, and in the late 80s, the Canadian government, through the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa, purchased this painting for $1.8 million. And it's still the most controversial purchase of that gallery's history. And the debate is not settled. I mean, I'm going to make an argument for why this painting was purchased, and I'm not going to try to tell anybody what to think, but I'm going to provide some background and let people make their own decisions. But I like to use this painting as kind of an inroad into the conversation about art history, because art history is not taught in public education, and hence there is quite a lot of confusion about why art history got to this point in the late 20th century. And because this painting its purchase, even though it's an American painting, but its purchase was a very controversial topic in Canada. So I think it's a good example of how to get into this conversation. So sometimes the art world is regarded as a bunch of rich people whining and dining and laughing it up and having their own private conversation or a private joke at the expense of the general public. And I'm gonna not deny that. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't actually exist to some extent, because the art industry is made up of galleries and museums and curators and collectors and critics, and it's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and it has a lot of prestige and wealth associated with it, and there is an elitism to it that I'm aware of. So I'm not going to pretend that this doesn't exist, and that there isn't a lot of vanity associated with owning paintings or being in the know about how valuable these things are, or being very educated and clever and to the extent of leaving the public on the outside. This does exist, but I don't think that's the entire story that leads to the Voice of Fire being purchased for $1.8 million. It's not the entire story, and my goal here is to give a little bit of background about the history of art with respect to how we got to modernism and postmodernism, two periods of art and philosophy and societal change that encompass the last roughly 150 years. And it might expand that story or the narrative of why these paintings were created and why they're worth so much. Okay, let's start with a few questions. Some questions for art students to consider. What is art? Where does the creative process come from? Why are people from every time period and every civilization compelled to make things? Artists should keep asking themselves these questions for the rest of their career. These questions never get fully answered, which thankfully keeps life interesting. And even making a lecture like this is good practice for me to keep asking those questions for my own studio practice and teaching practice. So, if we go way, way, way back to the birth of the earliest recorded artwork that we know of, we have paintings in various countries in the world, found in caves deep under the ground, and some of them are in France and China and Africa. And the scholars have deduced that because these paintings were many of them were so deep underground, that these spaces were not habitats for dwelling because they're so far underground. And it's because they were so deep that they were protected from the deterioration that comes from constant exposure to air and moisture from the surface, and that's why they've been preserved so well over the last 15,000 years, right, or more. And because they were so far down, the scholars have decided that the early humans, when they came down to these spaces to create these images, a lot of them celebrating the hunt or their relationship with their prey and predators, that these spaces were kind of a ritual that gave them power over the natural forces of the world, that kind of created this mysticism around their relationship with the natural world. How did we get from here to here? And here we have again the Voice of Fire, and we have Damien Hirst's Shark in a Box, which was called The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, which is a very fun title. And I think these two are again good examples of how far art has come from cave paintings, and they bring up some really interesting questions about what art actually is, and is it still serving the same purposes as the cave paintings or other works created by early humans. So, while art has vastly evolved through time, there are many common themes that crop up over and over. These themes represent issues that humans have been connected to, no matter where they come from or what time period they hail from. Some of these themes include the natural world. So we've got Van Gogh, we've got a Chinese scroll painting, and a European landscape, and then on the bottom left, landscape by the Group of Seven. So there's certain themes that people keep revisiting here. We've got religion and spirituality. There's the long history of humans asking questions and attempting to answer them about where we come from and our relationship with the universe, our relationship with the divine. And these answers gave us purpose, and they still, for many people in the world, still give us a grounding in the universe, and a sense of direction of where we go when we're not physically here anymore. So art played a pivotal role and continues to play a huge role in manifesting the visual aspect of what these deities would have looked like, or may indeed look like. Love and sexuality are without which humans would not exist. Just another obviously common theme that's found throughout many cultures. Portraiture and the human condition, which has some overlap with some images from the previous couple slides. Just examinations of who we are and documentation of what people look like from different time periods, and you see this gaze looking outwards from these canvases towards us and telling us a story about the time period and the culture and the civilization of where these artists hail from. It's the more you look at them, it's gripping. These people speaking to us from history. It's quite powerful. War and death, another very common theme throughout history and has been revisited many times in art. And these are just a few of the many themes that art touches on throughout the whole course of human history. Art history is really big. It's huge. To understand it more easily, scholars have divided into movements. Most of them end with ism. I liken this a little bit to taxonomy, which we studied in biology in grade 11 or grade 12. Because art history, like the biological world, is such a massive amount of information. To make it more digestible, we've sorted into movements. So these are some of the movements. I'm not going to list them all, but because, and this is mostly European and North American, because I'm living in Canada, and we are kind of the direct descendants of a history of European study. So it's not that other art forms from different places aren't also important, but because North America was colonized by Europeans, then we are the direct descendants of that history, and as such, these are some of the terms that we're familiar with in the narrative of how art has changed over the various hundreds of years, but most of these are within the last 200 years. All right, so at the very end, I say, yikes, that's a lot of different things, and most of these are really typically studied by historians, art historians, and not the general public. However, today we're going to look at modernism and postmodernism. So, historians and scholars group these together, these movements, whenever they've seen a mass of people creating similar work and thinking similar ideas during a specific period of time. Each movement either built upon or rejected ideas that came right before it. And before things went really global in the last 100 years, a lot of these movements were very restricted to a country or a group of countries, where people were all kind of milling around and creating art that looked like each other or was thinking about the same ideas. So it was very geographically bound until we get to modernism and postmodernism. Okay, some background here on what we mean by the word modern in an academic sense. Modern refers to a period of time roughly dating from the 1890s to the 1960s. So, and that's pretty important, because I believe that a lot of people, when they use modern, the word modern, they assume it means now. But in the academic sense, it is a finite period of time that had a beginning and a rough end in the 60s and 70s. Contemporary, however, describes the time we are living in now. So if we're in 2021, contemporary means this period right now. And then in 5 years, contemporary will still be contemporary, the time that we're living in in the future. So contemporary keeps shifting forwards, whereas modern is stuck. Modernism came about as a response to the Enlightenment, a period of rapid change and innovation throughout Europe. Modernism in visual and other creative arts focused a lot of attention on the physical qualities of the material and practice. And what does that mean? We're going to look at some examples. In the mid to late 1800s, photography had been invented, and this offered people a new tool to document the world around them in a way we'd never seen before. And that had the effect of driving many of the painters away from documenting the world as they always had been able to do before, because photography added this instantaneous realism that took painters quite a longer time to do. So one of the effects, as you're going to see in some of the examples later on, is that painters decided to stop trying to record the natural world and make paintings that were just about paint on canvas. So photography to some extent pushed painters towards abstraction. In Germany in 1919, the Bauhaus School was founded, and this was an integrated institution of art, design, and craft that had incredible influence on the 20th century of philosophy, architecture, graphic design, furniture design, architecture. And their motto was form follows function. So they sought to create a language of design and thinking where the form of something was preceded by the function. For example, if you look at the bottom right, that chair and ottoman, there is an emphasis on very little decoration, and the goal to create an ideal chair is to address how it functions first, and then that the form would come naturally as a result of addressing purely how to make it function as well as possible without added decoration. Same with those nesting chairs on the bottom left and the graphic design on the upper right. In 1952, John Cage released a composition called 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, which was literally a set of instructions for a musician to not perform, to not play any notes for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. John Cage was fascinated with the concept of silence, and he considered this to be his seminal work of his career. And his point was, he thought that the anticipation of a performance that would never happen had a psychological value to it, and the ambient noise associated with listening to a performance that's not happening was part of the performance itself. In 1959, William S. Burroughs wrote Naked Lunch, which was quite controversial for its time. It's a series of chapters that are designed to be read in any order that the viewer wishes. So he's disrupting the traditional concept of a narrative. And he wrote this novel without any punctuation, and so it's quite tiring and confusing to get through. It's just sentence after sentence that bleed into each other, with this very loose narrative detailing a junkie trying to score heroin and traveling around the world and accidentally killing his wife. And it's because he used no punctuation, it has this kind of psychological effect that quite well captures the, the mental state of a drug addict. And this book is considered one of the greatest English books of all time because it, again, redefined the question of what is this particular art form, which is literature. So this period in the mid 1900s is a time when people are stretching the boundaries of their particular art forms and asking, well, how far can we redefine this creative language that we are invested in and still communicate? So here's some examples of work that would have been done before modernism. Of course, everybody recognizes the painting to the left, and this is a painting during the period of modernism where there's no emphasis on creating an illusion or a window to another space with a narrative. This is a painting that is only concerned about the flatness of a canvas, because it in a way you could say it's aware of itself. It's a painting that recognizes that it is a canvas and it's flat and it sits on a wall and it's not a window. It's just an organization of shapes. Now, I'm not asking anybody to like this abstract art. Some people, many people would say that they don't get it, and that's okay. But I am going to say that these works are considered canonical to the 20th century because simply nobody had done it before. And they are, in a way, they are still paintings because they both of the images on this in this slide are all about organization of marks on a surface, and that's what the abstract expressionists were interested in. Is they're saying, well, all what we are doing is we are still making an image, but this is just about the image making and not about telling a story. This is just about organization of shapes. And Piet Mondrian, who made this painting, believed that he was channeling energies of the universe, and these paintings were highly spiritual for him. So go figure. What I can also say is abstract expressionism had a lot of impact on contemporary graphic design and furniture. So, if you look at this from through another lens, it has a lot of references to contemporary architecture and graphic design, and even the layouts of cities. So here's another painting before modernism and painting after modernism. So we have Renoir on the left and Jackson Pollock on the right. Sculpture before modernism, we've got Rodin. On the left we have a sculpture before modernism, and on the right we have sculpture after or during the period of modernism. And similar to what I was saying about the paintings, both of these sculptures are you could say are still doing the same thing they are organizations of shapes in a three-dimensional space, and they have a different kind of story to tell, but they are they still have a lot of inherent qualities that embody what a sculpture is meant to do, which uh, is an organization of shapes. One of my favorite artists who had a huge impact during this period is Marcel Duchamp, and here are two of his most well-known sculptures. He's a French artist, and a little bit of a shit disturber. He On the left, he has this sculpture called Bicycle Wheel, and what he did was he installed a bicycle wheel in a stool, creating this new kind of object that was neither a bicycle that could be ridden or a stool that could be sat on. Um, and it's like this new object that can only be contemplated, but it does have quite a lot of, to me, it has quite a lot of visual beauty to it because of it's just a very kind of a pleasant form, balanced, elegant form to look at. Uh, on the right, he is a urinal that he displayed in an art show, and controversially, the art show and the exhibitors were not pleased with this sculpture that he submitted under the pseudonym R. Mutt, which apparently was a reference to a toilet company. And this fountain was shuffled to the back of the exhibition behind a curtain. His point was partly to mock the art world itself, but also he was suggesting that the artists didn't have to make a work. A fountain or a urinal could be an artwork only because the artist said it was, and so he was suggesting the definition of a work of art could be completely decided by the artist, whether or not people liked it. But all the artist had to do was say, "This is my artwork," whether or not he or she made it, and that was good enough to qualify it as a work of art. As a side note, recently in history, the scholars have since suggested that one of his contemporaries, Elsa von Freytag Loringhoven, may have created this piece. So that is actually still in debate. But I like to give credit where credit might be due. Okay, now we are coming back to The Voice of Fire and some of the very common accusations that could be made by the general public when they're looking at a work of art such as this 17-foot tall painting of three stripes. And I want to unpack some of these statements that people might say. That's not art, my kid could have painted that, and why is it worth that much? Okay, so the first one is a kind of an easy one for me. That's not art. Well, it's not art for whoever is saying it, because art is so individual, and we've looked at quite a lot of examples of art through the ages, and art is just a thing that keeps changing over time. So something that an Egyptian made 3,000 years ago may not be considered art to somebody living now, right? So there's a inherent problem in the statement that's not art, because we don't have very clear boundaries on what art is. And Marcel Duchamp has been fairly well accepted by the establishment now, that the role of the artist is to define what art is. And because art keeps changing, it's impossible to actually say that something is an art. My kid could have painted that. Well, uh, first thing I would say is please don't demean your child, because children make amazing art, and uh, most children are better artists than most adults. So I have a problem with that. The secondly, kids could not paint this. This is a 17-foot tall painting with perfectly ruled stripes. Kids don't get up and make something like that. So um, it's not only that a kid couldn't make a 17-foot perfectly geometric painting, but that uh, sorry, my throat's a bit dry. Um, there's nothing wrong with a painting being extremely simplistic, because this is, again, it's an organization of shapes on a surface, and artists during this time period were creating these works partly because they hadn't been created before, and they were experimenting with a form of visual language that fit the time period and what people were thinking about at that time. So we've got William S. Burroughs writing a novel that has no punctuation, and we've got John Cage making a composition about silence, and similar things going on in architecture, similar things going on in typography, in contemporary dance, and the whole Western world of the artists and writers were all thinking these similar thoughts. So these things didn't pop up in a vacuum. Getting back to my one of my earlier slides with a bunch of rich people drinking wine and having this private joke. My what I want to say is that in this period, in the between late 1800s to the mid 1900s, all these artists and creators were thinking about redefining their medium to ask questions about what their medium even was. And now these pieces are considered canon because these were the natural evolution of where their languages ended up, because they were not interested in realism. The realism had been conquered back in like the Renaissance, so now they're concerned about making paintings that were just about paint on a canvas. Why is this painting worth this much? Good question. Because it is from this time period, and there's only one of it, and it is a historical record. Even though it looks really simple, and even though somebody said, "Well, I could make that," or "My kid could make that," but you didn't, and your kid didn't make it. This was made by Barnett Newman, and he was one of the leaders of this time period. He was one of the innovators from that era, and these paintings are associated with that period of time. Therefore, they are collectible because they were so influential. So if we look at some of the other things that are very collectible, we've got Action Comics #1 from 1938, first appearance of Superman and Lois Lane, estimated 70 copies in existence. Highest price paid for a near mint condition copy was $3 million US. This is the Cullinan diamond, which is the largest diamond ever found. It was cut into 9 separate smaller diamonds. Bought in 1907 for 150,000 pounds. Adjusted for inflation is now over 15 million pounds. Why are these things worth so much? Because they're rare. Because it's the law of supply and demand. And the painting by Barton and Newman is no different. Even again, though it seems really simple and it stretches the definition of what a lot of people might consider to be art. But the establishment that has looked at what the entire evolution of art and philosophy within the 19th century has universally agreed that abstract expressionism was a critical and necessary point in the evolution of visual art within the last century. Therefore, that painting and all the paintings from that period, well, particularly the ones made by the ones leading that evolution, are valuable and worthy of study, and because of capitalism, they are sought after. So, controversially, this painting was purchased in 1989 for 1.76 million. There are some estimates that it is worth over 40 million now. And so that's the part that I have a little chuckle over, because people were so furious about this purchase back in 1989. But 30 years later, it actually turned out to be a very wise investment by the National Gallery, because look at how much it's appreciated. Go figure. Okay, and this is the last slide. The period of modernism where people were experimenting with their particular creative languages ended in the 1960s, and essentially those artists and writers felt that they had said everything that they could at that point, and other artists wanted to return to kind of more traditional forms of storytelling and image making. And whenever a movement gets named by the people who study it, that often means that society has moved past it, or we're nearing the end of it. So by the time that they are starting to call that period modernism, that usually that signaled that they were moving past it and coming to a new vision, a new way of looking at the world and thinking about it. And so that's why they call the period that we're living in now postmodernism, which I'm going to save for another lecture. I hope this has helped people understand some of the crazy stuff that happened in the last 100 years. And I thank you for being with me. Have a good day.